Some people literally think they are the undisputed monarchs of public pavement, but I guess standing your ground against neighborhood tyrants is exactly what sovereign justice is all about. Let's just dive into it.
I live in Carmel, Indiana. If you've never been to Carmel, let me paint you a picture. It is a suburb that takes itself so seriously. The grass actually looks like it's stressed out. Every lawn is edged with laser precision. Every mailbox looks like a miniature Victorian monument. And the people? Well, the people are mostly fine, except for the vocal minority who have decided that their property line extends to the center of the earth and halfway to the moon. It was a Tuesday. A beautiful, crisp Tuesday afternoon. The kind of day where the sky is that aggressive shade of blue, and the neighborhood smells faintly of expensive fertilizer and unearned entitlement. I was driving home from work. Now my vehicle is not exactly Carmel approved. It's a 2006 Jeep Wrangler. It's got rust on the tailgate. It rattles when you hit a bump. Well, it sounds like a lawnmower that swallowed a handful of loose change. But I love it. It's paid off, it's mine, and it gets me from point A to point B. I turned onto my street, Sycamore Lane. It's a wide, quiet cul-de-sac. The speed limit is 20 miles per hour. I know this because there is a sign right at the entrance. I also know this because I am a functioning adult who knows how to read. I was coasting. Literally coasting. My foot was hovering over the brake, not the gas. I glanced down at my speedometer. 18 miles per hour. 18 miles per hour. I was under the limit. I was the very picture of suburban vehicular responsibility. Then it happened. I saw a flash of beige and pastel floral print darting out from behind a perfectly pruned rhododendron bush. It was Brenda. I didn't know her name was Brenda at the time, but she just looked like a Brenda, you know? She had that asymmetrical haircut that screams, "I need to speak to your manager right now." She was wearing capri pants and a visor. A visor? The sun was behind her. Brenda didn't just step onto the curb. Oh no. She lunged into the street like she was trying to throw herself on a grenade to save her platoon. She was waving her arms wildly, flapping them like a wacky waving inflatable tube man outside a used car dealership. I slammed on my brakes. The Jeep squeaked and juddered to a halt about 10 feet away from her. I rolled down my window, slightly dazed. "Whoa, hey, are you okay? Did you lose a dog or something?" Brenda marched up to my window. Her face was a vibrant, alarming shade of magenta. The veins in her neck were bulging so hard I thought they were trying to escape her body. "Are you out of your mind?" she shrieked. Her voice was a frequency that I'm pretty sure caused every dog in a 3-mile radius to start howling. "Excuse me?" I asked, genuinely baffled. "You were flying down this street. You treat this neighborhood like it's the Indy 500. There are children here." I looked around. There were no children. There was a squirrel holding an acorn, looking at us like we were interrupting his lunch. That was it. "Ma'am, I was going 18 miles an hour, I said calmly. I have a rule. When crazy escalates, I de-escalate. It usually makes them madder, which, honestly, is part of the fun. "Don't you lie to me," she yelled, pointing a manicured finger an inch from my nose. "I have eyes. I saw you. You were doing at least 50. 50? In a Jeep Wrangler? On a 200-foot stretch of road? Joy, I'd need a jet engine strapped to the roof to hit 50 that fast." 50? I let out a short laugh. I couldn't help it. "Ma'am, if this thing hit 50 on this street, the doors would vibrate off. I was going 18. "You are a menace!" she screamed, slapping her hands against her thighs. "I am calling the police. I am calling the HOA. I am calling the mayor." "Okay," I said, leaning back in my seat. You do that. But just so you know, I tapped the little black box mounted behind my rearview mirror. I have a dash cam. It records speed, GPS verified. It's going to show exactly how fast I was going. Did logic stop her? Did the cold, hard reality of recorded evidence give her pause? Of course not. She scoffed. A loud, wet, dramatic scoff. I don't care about your little Chinese plastic toy, she spat. My eyes are better than any camera. You slow down or I'll make sure you never drive on this street again. All right, Brenda, I said, putting the Jeep back into drive. Have a nice afternoon. My name is not Brenda, she yelled as I slowly idled past her. Could have fooled me, I called back. I pulled into my driveway, shaking my head. I figured that was the end of it. Just a bored suburbanite with too much time on her hands and not enough drama in her life. I went inside, grabbed a soda, and started booting up my computer to get some work done. 2 hours later. Knock, knock, knock. I opened the door. Standing on my porch was a Carmel police officer. He looked like he was in his late 30s, and he possessed the posture of a man who was deeply, fundamentally tired. His name tag read Officer Davis. Good afternoon, sir, he said. But he didn't sound aggressive. He just sounded defeated. Afternoon, officer. What can I do for you? Do you own a... He consulted a small notepad. A loud, rusty, older model Jeep? I do, I smiled. I prefer the term vintage and character-rich. But yes. Officer Davis let out a long, slow sigh. Right. Well, we received a call from a Mrs. Abernathy down the street. She claims you were drag racing through the neighborhood, doing upwards of 60 miles an hour, and almost ran her over. 60 now? The inflation on my speed was incredible. By tomorrow, I'd have broken the sound barrier. Officer, I said, opening the door wider. Come on in. You want a Coke or a water? I'm fine, sir. Just need to ask you about the incident. I get it. Listen, I told Mrs. Abernathy, who I've been calling Brenda in my head, that I have a dash cam. And it records my speed. You want to see the footage? His eyes actually lit up a little bit. You have a dash cam? With speed overlay? I sure do. Let's pull it up. I brought him into my home office. I pulled the micro SD card out of the camera, plugged it into my laptop, and found the file from 2 hours ago. I hit play. There it was. The serene, quiet street. The majestic oaks. My speed, clearly displayed in the bottom right corner in bright green digital numbers. 18 miles per hour. 18 miles per hour. 18 miles per hour. Then, on the screen, Brenda bursts from the bushes like a rabid badger. The speed drops immediately. 14 miles per hour. 8 miles per hour. 0 miles per hour. The audio picks up our entire exchange. Officer Davis watched it in complete silence. When the video ended with Brenda yelling that her eyes were better than a camera, he just pinched the bridge of his nose. I am so sorry to bother you with this, he said, his voice dropping an octave. Not your fault, man, I laughed. You have to respond to the calls. She told dispatch you were doing burnouts, he muttered, almost to himself. He stood up. Well, you're clearly completely innocent here. You were under the speed limit, you stopped safely, and you didn't escalate. So we're good? We are totally good, Officer Davis said. He walked toward the front door. But just be careful around her. People like that, when they get proven wrong, they don't apologize. They double down. I'll keep that in mind. Thanks, officer. He walked out to his cruiser. I watched through the front window. Down the street, Brenda was standing on her pristine lawn, hands on her hips, watching the police car. She looked smug. She thought she had won. So Officer Davis pulled his cruiser up to her house. He rolled down his window. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but I could see his body language. He was pointing down the street toward my house. He was shaking his head. Brenda's smug expression melted. Her jaw dropped. She started waving her arms again. Officer Davis just rolled his window up and drove away, leaving her fuming in a cloud of her own indignation. She turned and glared down the street, right at my house. Even from 200 yards away, I could feel the heat radiating off her. She wasn't going to let this go. And you know what? Neither was I. If she wants me to drive slower, I thought to myself, I can absolutely drive slower. I can be the safest driver this neighborhood has ever seen. That night, I sat at my computer. I opened up the Indiana State Traffic Codes. As I opened up the Carmel City Ordinances, I pulled up the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC and Rs, for our specific homeowners association. I read for 3 hours. I was looking for one thing: minimum speed limits. Here's a fun fact about residential cul-de-sacs in my city. There isn't one. There are laws against impeding the flow of traffic, sure. Indiana Code 92159 states you can't drive at such a slow speed that you block normal, reasonable traffic movement. But my street is a dead end. It has 12 houses on it. During the middle of the day, the normal flow of traffic is 0. If there's no one behind me, I'm not impeding anyone. The plan formed in my mind, crystal clear and utterly petty. The petty revenge protocol was officially initiated. The next morning, Wednesday, I woke up feeling a spring in my step. I went to work. I did my job. But all I could think about was the drive home. At 4:30 p.m., I turned onto Sycamore Lane. I drove normally until I reached the property line of the house right before Brenda's. Then, I reached out and pressed the little red triangle button on my dashboard. Tick-tock, tick-tock. The hazard lights flashed. I shifted the Jeep into first gear. I didn't touch the gas pedal. I just slowly, agonizingly slowly let out the clutch and rode the brake. The digital speedometer on my dash cam dropped. 15 miles per hour, 10 miles per hour, 5 miles per hour. I got it all the way down to a crawl. 1 mile per hour. 1 mile per hour is barely moving. It is the speed of a tired turtle. It is the speed of a glacier contemplating a career change. I approached Brenda's property line. She has about 120 feet of street frontage. At 1 mile per hour, you are traveling at roughly 1.46 feet per second. That meant it was going to take me exactly 82 seconds to pass her house. A minute and 22 seconds of pure, unadulterated crawling. I rolled my windows down. I turned the radio off. I wanted to hear everything. At first, nothing happened. I crept past her mailbox. Tick-tock, tick-tock. The Jeep's engine grumbled in a low, steady rhythm. Then, the front door ripped open. Brenda stormed out. She was wearing a different floral print today, but the visor was the same. She stopped on her front porch, staring at me in absolute bewilderment. I was barely moving. I was practically a parked car with ambitions. "What are you doing?" she screamed across the lawn. I leaned my elbow out the window. I gave her a bright, friendly wave. "Just trying to be safe, Brenda," I yelled back, just on my voice dripping with excessive cheerfulness. "Don't want to go too fast. Safety first." "I told you my name is not Brenda." "Copy that, Brenda. Have a blessed day." She stomped down the steps of her porch, marching toward the curb. I kept my foot hovering over the brake, maintaining that glorious 1-mile-per-hour crawl. "You are harassing me," she yelled, pointing that same manicured finger. "I'm driving on a public road, ma'am," I called back. "At a very safe, manageable speed. You told me to slow down. I'm taking your feedback to heart." She reached the curb just as the back half of my Jeep finally passed her driveway. She picked up a decorative garden gnome that was sitting next to her mailbox. For a second, I genuinely thought she was going to hurl it at my car. She raised it above her head, her face contorted in rage. But then she just slammed it back down into the dirt. "I'm calling the police again!" she shrieked. "Tell Officer Davis I said hi," I yelled. Once I cleared her property line, I clicked off the hazards, gave it a little gas, and drove the remaining distance to my house at a blistering 15 miles per hour. I parked in my garage, shut off the engine, and just sat there in the quiet for a minute. I felt fantastic. It was petty, it was childish, it was profoundly stupid, but it was also completely legal, and it felt incredible. But I knew one time wasn't going to be enough. A point is only made through repetition. Thursday morning, 7:30 a.m., leaving for work. I backed out of my driveway. I drove normally until I approached her property line from the other direction. Tick-tock, tick-tock, hazard lights on. First gear, 1 mile per hour. But she was in her front window this time, holding a cup of coffee. I saw the exact moment she noticed me. She froze. The coffee cup stopped halfway to her mouth. I honked the horn, just a quick friendly double tap, and waved. She yanked the curtains shut so hard I thought she was going to rip the rod out of the drywall. Thursday evening, 5 p.m., coming home. Tick-tock, tick-tock, 1 mile per hour. This time she was waiting. She was standing on the curb with her arms crossed. As I crawled past, taking my sweet, agonizing 82 seconds, she held up her phone. She was recording me. I smiled. I gave her a thumbs up. "Make sure you get my good side, Brenda," I shouted. Friday was my day off. I had errands to run. 10 a.m., going to the hardware store. 1 mile per hour past Brenda's house. 11:30 a.m., coming back from the hardware store. 1 mile per hour past Brenda's house. 1 p.m. "Oh no, I forgot to buy screws. Better go back out. 1 mile per hour past Brenda's house. 1:45 p.m. Coming back with screws. 1 mile per hour past Brenda's house." By Friday afternoon, she was losing her mind. When I did my 1:45 p.m. crawl, she was standing in her driveway holding what looked like a radar gun. I am not kidding. She actually bought a speed radar gun. She pointed it at my Jeep as I inched past. "What's it say, Brenda?" I yelled over the rumble of my engine. "Am I breaking the sound barrier yet?" "You're a psychopath," she screamed. "You are sick in the head." "Just practicing defensive driving." The weekend arrived. I figured I would give her a break. I didn't drive anywhere on Saturday or Sunday. I stayed home, mowed my lawn, and enjoyed the quiet. I assumed the point had been made. She demanded I slow down, and I showed her what slow actually looked like, and now we could go back to ignoring each other. I was wrong. Monday morning, 8 a.m. I pulled out of my driveway to head to work. I decided not to do the 1 mile per hour crawl. I was just going to drive normally. I accelerated to 18 miles per hour. As I passed Brenda's house, she wasn't on the lawn, but there was a Carmel police SUV parked directly across the street from her driveway. I didn't think much of it until the red and blue lights flashed in my rearview mirror. You have got to be kidding me. I pulled over to the curb immediately. I shut off the engine, rolled down the window, and put my hands on the steering wheel. In my side mirror, I saw 2 officers get out of the SUV. Neither of them was Officer Davis. They walked up to my window. One was older, graying at the temples, as the other looked like he was fresh out of the academy. "License and registration, please," the older officer said. I handed them over. Is there a problem, officer? Sir, are you aware of why we pulled you over? I have absolutely no idea. I was doing 18 in a 20. We're not pulling you over for speeding, sir, the officer said, leaning down slightly. We're pulling you over because we received a complaint about a vehicle matching this description intentionally obstructing traffic and harassing a resident on this street. I sighed. Did Mrs. Abernathy call you? We don't disclose the names of callers, sir, but we have been informed that you have been repeatedly driving back and forth past a specific residence at 1 mile per hour with your hazard lights on. That is correct, I said plainly. And the younger officer looked surprised that I just admitted it. Sir, why are you doing that? Well, officers, a few days ago, that resident jumped into the street, screamed at me, and falsely accused me of doing 50 miles an hour. She demanded that I slow down. I am simply complying with her request in the safest manner possible. The older officer let out a dry chuckle, then quickly suppressed it. Look, man, I get it. It's funny. We've seen the videos. She's been emailing them to the precinct captain. Wait, she's sending you guys the videos of me driving 1 mile an hour? I laughed. Does she think that proves I'm a danger? She thinks it proves you're harassing her with slowness, the officer said, rubbing his chin. But here's the thing. You can't do this. Why not? I asked politely. Is it illegal? Indiana Code 92159. But you cannot drive at a slow speed that impedes the normal movement of traffic. I had prepared for this exact moment. Actually, officer, I said, shifting in my seat. I read that statute. It specifically says, impedes the normal movement of traffic. I checked my dashcam footage for the entire week. Not once, during any of my slow drives, was there a single car behind me. Not one. I am not impeding traffic because there is no traffic to impede. It's a dead-end street in the middle of the day. The older officer frowned. He knew I was right. Furthermore, I continued, my vehicle has been experiencing some intermittent mechanical hesitation. The engine sputters. I put the hazards on to warn other drivers, should they appear, that I am experiencing technical difficulties. I drive slowly until the engine smooths out. Which usually happens right around the time I pass her property line. Just a weird coincidence. The two officers looked at each other. The young guy was biting his lip to keep from laughing. Sir, the older officer said, his tone turning a bit more stern. You know what you're doing. We know what you're doing. You're playing games. And while technically you might not be violating the letter of the traffic code, the city can and will slap you with a nuisance citation or a disturbing the peace charge if you keep this up. We have better things to do than babysit a neighborhood feud. Knock it off. Drive normally. He handed my license and registration back. Consider this a warning, he said. Have a good day at work. They walked back to their SUV. I sat there for a second. Brenda was standing in her window, a smug, yet triumphant smile plastered across her face. She thought she had won again. She used the police as her personal private security force to enforce her own personal comfort levels. I drove to work, but my mind was racing. The 1 mile per hour drive was fun, but it was flawed. It relied on public roadways, which meant I was subject to city ordinances, police interpretation of nuisance, and the general mood of whoever got dispatched. If I kept doing it, they would eventually find a way to ticket me. I needed something stronger. I needed a legal shield so thick that not even a battalion of Karens could pierce it. I needed to move the battlefield off the public road. That night, instead of watching TV, I went to the Hamilton County Recorder's Office website, and I paid the $15 fee to access the historical deed records for my property and the surrounding lots. My house was built in 1985, but the land it sits on used to be part of a much larger farm. When developers subdivide land, weird things happen. Lines get drawn, rights get transferred, And sometimes little legal ghosts get left behind in the paperwork. I started digging. I traced the title of my property back. 1990, 1985, 1972, 1960. I was looking at the plat maps, staring at the borders of my lot and Brenda's lot. They didn't quite touch. There was a weird sliver of land between us, currently owned by the guy next to Brenda. But that didn't help me. I kept digging. I started reading the actual text of the old deeds, the scanned, typewritten documents from the mid-20th century. And then, at 1:45 a.m., was on a blurry scan of a deed dated October 14th, 1952. I found it. I literally gasped out loud in my empty home office. It was an appurtenant easement. Back in 1952, the owner of my parcel needed a way to get a tractor back to a creek that ran behind the properties to pump water. So they legally carved out a right-of-way. The deed stated, in plain, unambiguous legal English, that my property possessed a perpetual, non-exclusive easement for the purposes of ingress and egress, 10 feet in width, running parallel to the eastern boundary of Brenda's current property line. I pulled up the modern satellite view. I overlaid the historical survey map. I couldn't believe my eyes. Brenda's lot wasn't a perfect rectangle. It tapered in the back. But her front yard, the pristine, perfectly manicured lawn that she prized above all else, extended 10 feet further east than her actual buildable property line. She had been mowing, watering, and fertilizing an easement that belonged to my property. An easement that gave me the legal, deeded right to drive a vehicle across the easternmost 10 feet of her front yard to access the back of my lot. It wasn't a public road. It was a private property, right attached to my deed. City traffic laws didn't apply. Police couldn't enforce minimum speeds. The HOA couldn't do a damn thing because county deed restrictions supersede HOA bylaws. Brenda had weaponized the police against me on the public street. So I was going to build my own street, right through her petunias. I mean, honestly, I don't think I slept a single wink that night. I was practically vibrating. Have you ever discovered a legal loophole so beautiful and so perfectly tailored to ruin the day of someone who absolutely deserves it, that you just lay in bed staring at the ceiling and giggling like a supervillain? Because that was me. I was literally clutching a printed copy of a 1952 property deed to my chest like it was a winning lottery ticket. But here is the thing about old legal documents. You can't just walk outside with a tape measure from your garage and start claiming land. If I was going to do this, if I was going to carve a path of righteous, gravel-covered vengeance straight through Brenda's pristine, award-winning landscaping, it had to be airtight, like molecularly impenetrable. So, first thing Tuesday morning, I called a professional land surveyor. Let's introduce Tom. Tom is a guy who looks like he has been squinting at the sun for 40 years. He shows up in a high-vis vest, and driving a truck covered in mud, holding a clipboard and an iced coffee. I hand him the deed. I point at the property line. I point at Brenda's yard. I need you to find the original pins, I tell him, and I need you to mark out exactly where my 10-foot easement sits. Tom takes one look at the paperwork, looks at Brenda's immaculately manicured lawn, and gives me this look. It's a look of pure, unadulterated respect. "You're going to use the access right?" he asks, taking a sip of his coffee. "I am going to use the heck out of it, Tom." He chuckles. "All right, let's find some iron." Tom pulls out this massive metal detector. He starts sweeping the edge of the street. It takes him about 20 minutes to find the first surveyor's pin, buried under 3 inches of Brenda's precious topsoil and Kentucky bluegrass. He digs a tiny hole. Choso finds the rusted iron rod placed there during the Eisenhower administration and pounds a wooden stake into the ground right next to it. He sprays the top of the stake with blinding neon pink paint. He does this all the way up the property line, 10 feet in from the edge of her lawn. He is literally walking through her prized petunia beds, planting neon pink wooden stakes every 15 feet. And of course, it doesn't take long for the beast to awaken. The front door flies open. Brenda comes storming out. She is wearing a beige cardigan and an expression that suggests she just smelled something rotting. "Excuse me, what in the world do you think you are doing?" she screeches. Tom doesn't even flinch. He just keeps writing on his clipboard. "Surveying the property lines, ma'am." "You are vandalizing my property. What, you are trampling my flowers. Get off my lawn right now or I am calling the police." I casually lean against my Jeep, sipping my own coffee. "Actually, Brenda, he's marking my easement. It turns out you've been doing a lovely job maintaining the land I have a deeded right to use. I really appreciate the free landscaping." She stops dead in her tracks. Her eyes dart from me to Tom to the neon pink stakes forming a boundary line 10 feet deep into what she thought was her yard. "You are insane," she spits out. "That is my yard. I have lived here for 12 years. "And for 12 years, you've been trespassing on my ingress and egress rights," I say, taking a loud sip of my coffee. "Tom here is just clarifying the boundaries. Have a great day." She pulls out her phone, literally shaking with rage, but Tom is already packing up his truck. So he hands me the certified survey map, stamped with his official seal. "There you go, buddy," Tom says, grinning. 10 feet wide, run straight back. It's all yours." With the land officially marked, it was time for Phase 2. I needed muscle. I needed heavy machinery. I needed a contractor who wouldn't ask too many questions, or better yet, one who would enjoy the sheer petty chaos of the project. Enter Foreman Mike. I found Mike's excavation and hardscaping on Yelp. His reviews basically said, "Mike is gruff, he drinks too much black coffee, but he moves dirt faster than God." Perfect. I met Mike at a diner on Wednesday afternoon. Mike is built like a cinder block with a beard. He slid into the booth across from me and didn't even look at the menu. "So, you said on the phone you need a driveway cut in," Mike grumbled. "Crushed limestone, was 10 feet wide, about 150 feet long." "That's right," I said, sliding the survey map and the 1952 deed across the table. Mike put on a pair of reading glasses that looked comically small on his massive face. He studied the paperwork for a solid 2 minutes. Then he looked up at me. "This is an easement," he said. "Yep." "Through a suburban front yard." "Yep." "Through an existing lawn that looks like it belongs on a magazine cover." "Honestly, Mike, it's mostly Kentucky bluegrass, but there's a heavy mix of petunias and a very pretentious rhododendron bush in the way." Mike took off his glasses. A slow, terrifying smile spread across his face. "The homeowner next door. She's not gonna like this." "Mike," I leaned in. "The homeowner next door called the cops on me because I drove 1 mile per hour past her house. She is the reason we are sitting here." Mike let out a booming laugh that made the waitress drop a handful of silverware. "I like you, kid. You want gravel or you want me to pour concrete?" "Gravel," I said. "Gravel is loud. It crunches. I want it to sound like I'm driving over 1,000 bowls of stale cereal every time I pull in. When can you start?" "I have a crew finishing a job on Friday. I can have a bobcat and a dump truck at your place Saturday morning. Say 7 a.m. "Make it 6:45, I said. sliding a deposit check across the table. Thursday and Friday were agonizing. I felt like a kid waiting for Christmas morning, if Christmas involved heavy construction equipment and the destruction of a Karen's fragile reality. I didn't even do my 1-mile-per-hour crawl those days. I just drove normally. But I think Brenda thought she had finally intimidated me into submission. She would stand on her porch and literally smirk at me as I drove past. Little did she know, the sword of Damocles was currently parked in a lot downtown, loaded with 5 tons of crushed limestone. Saturday morning, 6:30 a.m. The sun is barely up. The neighborhood is silent. The only sound is the gentle rustling of the leaves and the distant chirp of a bird. Then I feel it. A low rumble vibrating through the floorboards of my house. I grabbed my coffee mug, threw on a jacket, and walked out to my front porch. Rolling down Sycamore Lane, moving with the slow, inevitable dread of a natural disaster, was a massive yellow dump truck, followed closely by a heavy-duty pickup hauling a flatbed trailer with a Bobcat skid-steer loader chained to it. It was a beautiful sight. Mike pulled the pickup onto the street, parking right in front of Brenda's house. The air brakes on the dump truck hissed violently. Psst! It echoed through the cul-de-sac like a cannon shot. Mike stepped out of his truck. He was wearing steel-toed boots, jeans, and a stained high-vis jacket. He unhooked the chains on the Bobcat. The metal chains clanged and smashed against the trailer. He wasn't trying to be quiet. Honestly, I think he was trying to be as loud as physically possible. He hopped into the Bobcat. The diesel engine roared to life. It sounded like a mechanical dragon waking up. He backed it off the trailer. Beep, 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 beep. The reverse alarm pierced the quiet suburban morning. It was 6:47 a.m. I stood on my porch, sipping my coffee, watching the masterpiece unfold. Mike drove the Bobcat right up to the edge of the street, aligning the bucket perfectly with the neon pink stakes Tom had left. He dropped the bucket. The heavy steel scraped against the asphalt, then bit into the earth. With a sickening rip, Mike tore up the first massive chunk of Brenda's prize-winning Kentucky bluegrass. It took exactly 4 seconds for the front door to explode open. Brenda came tearing out of her house. She was wearing a fluffy white bathrobe, pink fuzzy slippers, and a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. She looked like she had just seen an alien spaceship land on her roof. "Stop! Stop! Oh my God, stop!" she was screaming, running across her lawn, waving her arms frantically. Mike couldn't hear her. He was in a diesel-powered metal box, wearing ear protection, tearing up sod like it was wrapping paper. And he scooped up a huge pile of dirt, grass, and half of the rhododendron bush, spun around, and dumped it into the waiting dump truck. Brenda ran up to the side of the Bobcat, literally pounding her fists on the glass door. Mike finally noticed her, stopped the machine, and rolled down the window. "Can I help you, lady?" Mike asked, completely unbothered. "What are you doing? You are destroying my yard. Get that machine off my property right now." Mike pointed a thick, calloused finger toward my house. "Talk to the boss. I just moved the dirt." Brenda spun around. She locked eyes with me, standing on my porch with my coffee. If looks could kill, I would have spontaneously combusted right there. She marched over to my property line, her fuzzy slippers soaking wet from the morning dew. "You!" she screamed, pointing that same manicured finger. You are completely unhinged. I am calling the police. I am calling the HOA. I am having you arrested for destruction of property." "Go right ahead, Brenda," I said smoothly. "But just a heads up, this is entirely legal. I hired them to clear my deeded easement, like I told you on Tuesday." "It is my yard," she shrieked, her voice cracking. You can't just build a road in my yard." "Watch me," I smiled. "Hey, Mike, keep digging." Mike gave me a thumbs up, rolled up his window, and the bobcat roared back to life. Beep-a, beep, 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 beep. Another scoop of perfect grass was ripped from the earth. Brenda pulled her phone out of her bathrobe pocket. Her hands were shaking so badly she dropped it twice. She finally dialed 911. "Hello? Police? Yes, I need officers at my house immediately. My neighbor has lost his mind. He has heavy machinery destroying my property. Yes, hurry." She hung up, glaring at me. "You are going to jail. You are going to pay for every single blade of grass." I just took another sip of my coffee. "I doubt it, but hey, feel free to pull up a lawn chair and watch the show. Just make sure you stay at least 10 feet back from the property line. It's an active construction zone now." It didn't take long. Within 15 minutes, the cul-de-sac looked like a circus. First, the Carmel police arrived. And guess who stepped out of the cruiser? My man, Officer Davis. He looked at the dump truck. He looked at the bobcat currently ripping up a flower bed. He looked at Brenda in her bathrobe. And then he looked at me on my porch. He just closed his eyes and let out a sigh that I could feel from 50 feet away. A moment later, a golf cart came humming down the street. It was driven by Richard, the president of the Homeowners Association. Richard was a guy who treated the HOA like it was a branch of the federal government. He wore khaki shorts, a tucked-in polo shirt, and a lanyard with a whistle. He looked apoplectic. Finally, a white city truck pulled up. The side said City of Carmel, Code Enforcement. A guy named Dave stepped out, holding a clipboard. Brenda immediately rushed them. "Arrest him! Arrest him right now! Look what he's doing to my yard!" Officer Davis, Richard, and Dave all walked over to my driveway. I walked down to meet them, holding a thick manila envelope. "Morning, gentlemen," I said cheerfully. "Beautiful day for some hardscaping, isn't it?" "What the hell is going on here?" Richard yelled, his face turning red. "You cannot do this. And this is an unauthorized architectural change. You didn't submit an approval form to the HOA committee." "And you are destroying private property," Officer Davis said, though he sounded more exhausted than accusatory. "Sir, I told you to knock off the games." "It's not a game, Officer Davis," I said, opening my manila envelope. "And Richard, I don't need HOA approval. Dave, I think you're going to want to see this." I pulled out 3 copies of the 1952 property deed, 3 copies of the certified survey map from Tuesday, and the plat layout of the subdivision. I handed 1 packet to each of them. "Gentlemen," I announced, loudly enough for Brenda to hear, "what you are looking at is an appurtenant easement, legally deeded in 1952, permanently attached to the title of my property. It grants me a perpetual, non-exclusive 10-foot-wide right-of-way for ingress and egress. It predates the HOA by 40 years. It predates city zoning by 30 years. That land is legally mine to access, clear, and maintain for the purpose of a driveway." Silence fell over the group. The only sound was the bobcat in the background, dumping a load of dirt. Crash. Dave, the city inspector, pushed his glasses up his nose. He read the deed. He looked at the survey map. He walked over to the neon pink stakes, measured the distance with his eyes, and walked back. He looked at Brenda, who was practically vibrating with anxiety. "Ma'am," Dave said slowly. "He's right." "What?" Brenda shrieked. "No, he's faking those documents. It's my yard." "Ma'am, the survey is certified and stamped," Dave replied, pointing to the seal on the paper. "And the county records confirm it. Unless your property line ends 10 feet before you thought it did. He has the absolute legal right to clear this easement." Richard, the HOA president, sputtered. But the covenants. The aesthetic integrity of the neighborhood. County property deeds supersede HOA bylaws, Richard, I said, tapping the paper in his hand. You can fine me all you want. I'll take it to a judge, and the judge will throw it out. I have a fundamental property right to access this land. Unless you want the HOA to get sued for interfering with a deeded right-of-way, I suggest you get back in your golf cart. Richard's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He knew I was right. HOA rules can't overwrite actual property law. He glared at me, turned around, got in his golf cart, and drove away without saying another word. Brenda turned to Officer Davis in a panic. "Arrest him! He's disturbing the peace! It's too early for construction!" Officer Davis looked at his watch. "Actually, ma'am, city noise ordinances lift at 7 a.m. on Saturdays. It's 7:15. As for the property dispute, like Dave said, he has the legal right to be there. This is a civil matter. The police have no jurisdiction here." "You're just going to let him tear up my yard?" she cried. "It's not your yard, ma'am," Officer Davis said gently. "I suggest you go inside. Have a good morning." Officer Davis got back in his cruiser. Dave got back in his city truck. They both drove away. Brenda was left standing on the edge of the newly carved trench, completely alone. Her legal threats were gone. Her authorities had abandoned her. The reality of the situation came crashing down on her all at once. When she looked at me, there was no anger left in her eyes, just shock. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Because, Brenda," I said softly, stepping closer to the property line. "A week ago, I was driving 18 miles an hour, minding my own business. You decided to jump in the street, scream at me, lie to the cops, and try to make my life miserable just because you wanted to feel powerful. You demanded I slow down. You demanded I stop driving on the public road. So I built my own." I turned back to the construction crew. "Hey, Mike, bring in the gravel." The rest of the morning was a symphony of destruction and creation. Mike's crew was incredibly efficient. By 10 a.m., they had dug out the entire 10-foot-wide trench, straight back to the rear of my property. And they laid down heavy-duty landscaping fabric to prevent weeds, and then the dump truck backed in. With a massive roaring rush, tons of jagged, white, crushed limestone poured into the trench. Mike used the bobcat to smooth it out, packing it down tight. By noon, it was done. What used to be a seamless, perfectly manicured expanse of Kentucky bluegrass was now brutally interrupted by a 10-foot-wide, stark white, incredibly loud gravel road. And the best part? It ran exactly 2 feet away from Brenda's living room window. I paid Mike in cash. He shook my hand, laughing the entire time, and loaded up his equipment. The quiet of the neighborhood slowly returned, but things were never going to be the same. I waited until late afternoon to initiate the final phase of the operation. The gravel was settled. The sun was starting to dip lower in the sky. I walked out to my driveway, got into my Jeep, and started the engine. But I didn't back out onto the public street. I threw it into reverse, backed up a few feet, and then cranked the steering wheel hard to the right. The tires left the concrete of my driveway and hit the fresh limestone. Crunch. Crackle. Pop. The sound was magnificent. Every single tire revolution sounded like a giant crushing a bag of potato chips. I shifted the Jeep into 4-wheel drive low. 4 low basically turns the vehicle into a tractor. It maximizes torque and minimizes speed. I reached over and pressed the hazard light button. Tick-tock, tick-tock. I rolled all the windows down. And then I began the drive. I wasn't doing 1 mile per hour anymore, because I was no longer on a public road, and I was not subject to city ordinances regarding impeding traffic. I was on a private driveway. I could go as slowly as I wanted. I took my foot completely off the gas. I let the engine idle in 4 low. I was doing 0.5 miles per hour. The Jeep inched forward. Crunch, crunch, crunch. I slowly maneuvered down the gravel path. Because it was 10 feet wide, and my Jeep is about 6 feet wide, I had to be very, very careful. I hugged the side closest to Brenda's house. My passenger side mirror was literally brushing against the surviving half of her rhododendron bush. I crept past her front porch. I crept past her dining room window. I finally reached her living room window. I stopped the Jeep. I just sat there. The engine rumbled. The exhaust pipe, which is conveniently located on the passenger side of my Jeep, was pointing directly at her siding, gently puffing exhaust fumes toward her window screen. I sat there for 2 solid minutes. The curtain twitched, then it ripped open. Brenda's face appeared in the window. She was inches away from my passenger side mirror. She looked haggard. She looked defeated. She looked like a woman who had finally realized she picked a fight with the wrong level of petty. I leaned over the center console, smiled, and gave her a little salute. She didn't scream. She didn't yell. She didn't reach for her phone to call the cops. She just slowly closed the curtain. I put the Jeep back in gear and spent the next 3 minutes creeping the rest of the way down the gravel path to the back of my lot. It was the sweetest, most satisfying drive of my entire life. For the next 2 weeks, this became my routine, and I completely abandoned the public street. Every morning when I left for work, I backed out of my garage, drove down the gravel easement at 0.5 miles an hour, crunching loudly past her windows. Every evening when I came home, I did the exact same thing. Sometimes, if I was feeling particularly generous, I would stop halfway down the path, get out of the Jeep, and pretend to inspect my tires. Just standing there, legally, on my property, 2 feet from her house, whistling a jaunty tune. The neighborhood noticed, of course. You can't secretly build a gravel road through someone's front yard. A few of the neighbors came over to ask what happened. When I explained the story, how she falsely accused me, called the cops, and demanded I slow down, every single one of them laughed. It turned out, Brenda had been terrorizing the cul-de-sac for years. She had reported people for having their trash cans out too early. She had called the HOA on kids playing basketball in their own driveways. She was the neighborhood menace. And suddenly, she had been completely neutralized by a 1952 piece of paper and a rusty Jeep Wrangler. She tried to fight back, of course, but it was pathetic. She sent a cease and desist letter from a lawyer. I threw it in the trash. You can't cease and desist a deeded property right. She tried to put up a barricade of potted plants on the gravel. I just slowly pushed them out of the way with my steel bumper. I mean, literally, I just let the Jeep idle forward until her $50 terracotta pots tumbled over into her own grass. She came out screaming that I was destroying her property. And I politely reminded her that anything placed on an active right-of-way is considered abandoned debris, and if she did it again, I would charge her a clearing fee. She never put the pots back. The absolute peak of the war, the moment I knew I had broken her spirit entirely, happened on a Tuesday. Exactly 1 month after she first jumped into the street to yell at me. I was coming home from work. It was raining. A miserable, cold, driving rain. I turned onto the gravel path. The limestone was wet, so it didn't crunch as loudly, but the Jeep was muddy. I engaged 4 low, put the hazards on, and began my 0.5 mile per hour crawl. As I passed her living room window, I saw her. She was sitting in an armchair, looking out the window. She had a glass of wine in her hand. She just watched me creep by. The smugness was completely gone. The anger was evaporated. She looked at me the way a defeated general looks at the conquering army marching through the capital. I didn't wave. I didn't smile. I just kept driving. The next day, a contractor's van showed up at her house. Not an excavation crew, a fencing company. She was putting up a fence. I watched from my office window as the guys started measuring the yard. Naturally, I couldn't just let them work in peace. I had a responsibility to protect my borders. I walked outside with my tape measure and my survey map. "Hey guys," I called out to the fencing crew. "Just making sure you know where the property line is." The foreman walked over. "Yeah, the lady inside said we need to build it right against the gravel." "Well, the gravel is 10 feet wide," I said, pointing to the edge. "But the easement extends an additional 6 inches past the gravel to allow for drainage. If you put a single post in that 6-inch margin, I will legally have to tear it down with a chainsaw. I'd hate for you guys to do all this work for nothing." The foreman looked at the map, looked at the gravel, and sighed. "We'll set it back a foot from the gravel, just to be safe." "Smart man," I smiled. When the fence went up, it was a solid 8-foot-tall white vinyl privacy fence. It ran the entire length of her property, completely separating her house from the gravel path. She essentially boxed herself in. She shrunk her own yard by a massive percentage just so she wouldn't have to look at my Jeep anymore. But here's the beautiful, tragic irony of the privacy fence. It blocked her view, yes, but it did absolutely nothing to block the sound. Yes, in fact, the tall vinyl panels acted like an acoustic echo chamber. When I drove down the gravel path, the sound of the crunching limestone bounced off the fence and echoed straight up into her second-story bedroom windows. It was actually louder now. She had paid thousands of dollars to amplify the sound of her own defeat.